Welcome back to Books and Bubbles, the podcast where we talk about our favorite book obsessions while sipping on tasty drinks themed to our books. I'm Paige.
I'm Bethany.
I'm Tawny.
I'm Maggie.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we're going to talk all about Onyx Storm. We've been very excited to get into this. We waited a long time. Some of us have waited for our books longer than others, but we're really excited to talk about it all with you today. And I think we're going to just kick things off with diving right in.
So, Paige, do you want to talk about the slander you had on our girl Violet in our last episode about her being venom?
I don't think I'd call it slander, but I am also not giving up on that yet. We might not have seen her turn in this book, but I have a lot to say on this. Maybe we should start off with a shot.
All right. Well, I have prepared a turning venom shot. It is a bubble shot. So for those of you who don't know what a bubble shot is and aren't watching us, Paige is going to explain what a bubble shot is.
Yeah, so it's more about the glass. So it's like a bubble shot glass. You put your liquor on the top and your chaser on the bottom. And the idea is that it's not supposed to combine until you're drinking. So your chaser is going to follow your shot. Sarah's, you can see it a lot better with because hers hasn't turned yet, but it's clear on the top and red on the bottom. So as you're drinking, your mixer mixes with the liquor. It's just like a shot and a chaser all in one.
I think you four turned venom already.
Yeah, we're there. All right, you ready,
no,
ladies?
Only Sarah's innocent.
Oh, no. So cheers. Cheers.
So we start off in Onyx Storm right after the battle in Iron Flame. We've got Venom running around Basgiath. We've got Oration Riders and the Basgiath Riders just absolutely hating each other. I was really hoping to see a little bit more camaraderie there, but it was just not happening. We've got the Flyers. Nobody trusts the Flyers. We've got Violet committing treason to try to make that work for everybody. And Atos is running around in General Sorrengail's position. It's just a lot of changes very early on. We find out that Xaden is accidentally channeling or very tempted to channel, so now we're nervous about that. And we also get this fun moment, though, where we get to see Violet really step into her own. Like, did you guys notice that as well? Like, it seemed like we got a totally different Violet in this book.
Yeah, I for sure saw Violet step into more of a command power. And then I also really loved seeing her with Andarna having less of a sassy teenager moment and more of a like, yeah, we're bonded, I'm supporting you moment.
I loved watching Violet have so much more confidence with herself and take charge of the things she wanted. And her self-doubt went away a lot with this book.
Yeah, I had so much respect for her because I feel like if I had a parent die and my partner turned venom all on the same day, I'd probably be curled up in a ball in bed, not functioning. So for her to turn from that and take charge and not only just keep carrying on, but take control of the situation was super admirable to me.
And I did also notice too, kind of going back to the Andarna thing that you were just talking about, her and Andarna were thick as thieves. Right in the beginning of the book, we got a really good back and forth with them. Occasionally Andarna chimes in and you hear her little thoughts and quips throughout the book. But there's not a lot of conversation that we get between Violet and Andarna. And right in the beginning we did. And Andarna says to Violet, you don't answer to them anymore. You are my bonded and you are Taryn's rider. And she basically indoctrinates Violet into the Empyrean, I feel like, in that moment. And Violet makes a point of saying that when she stands up in front of the council. And she's like, yeah, by the way, I don't answer to you. I'm going to do whatever I want. And I just love seeing it. She's breaking all the rules. I think she's going to be the key to getting everybody together on this because she doesn't care about anything other than those that she loves.
Yeah, I loved all the Andarna content in the beginning of the book. I thought it was much needed. I loved that the four dragons were sleeping and resting, so we really just got to see the relationship between Violet and Andarna.
Every possible path.
Yes.
And it was fun seeing Andarna kind of grow up. From the first couple of books, she was definitely in her adolescent phase. She was super sassy, but it feels like she's kind of coming into herself. And I feel like the bond between her and Violet grew so much. Now, coming off of Iron Flame, it was definitely an adjustment as far as Xaden goes, because we are used to Xaden being our number one person. We love Xaden so much. So seeing him turn and kind of starting to question him was a little bit hard for me, at least. What did you guys think? How much were you trusting Xaden at first?
I started off at 100%. I really wasn't worried. I had the same rose-colored glasses on that Violet was wearing. And I started to really question myself, though, a little bit with just his attitude towards it, because he was like, don't trust me. I can't be trusted. And he's the one that's venom. So I feel like he knows what he's talking about. So anytime anything was happening, I really had to decide whether or not I trusted him. And at the end of the day, I think I land with, I do trust him implicitly, not to harm Violet. I think that's safe to say for now, but I don't know that he's still being 100% truthful with her, because he also makes the comments about, like, it's always you when he's tracking the venom. And I think that probably goes to show, I mean, maybe it's a hint that she could also be something he's sensing, or it could just go more into the venom are definitely after her. And in his conversations with Jack, he's talking about, like, you could be the one to deliver her or do this or do that. So I think that at the end of the day, I still trust the guy, but he's not being 100% truthful. So it's so hard. I want to know what he's thinking about that he's not talking about. And it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I did feel like I trusted him 100% because the one time he did channel there at the beginning, like Violet said, she had to squint to see where he channeled. And I think he was just a little pre-paranoid, if you will, about, I'm venom now. This means that I can do a lot more. This means that I can hurt you without even trying to, in some sense. I think he's just kind of figuring out what it means to be venom. And I think what we're seeing at the beginning there is Xaden's own anxieties of, like, what does being venom now mean? And how badly can I hurt you? And then as the story goes on, I think he relaxes his own leash a little, and then we can lean more into trusting him.
I agree with that. Looking in the past couple books about Xaden's character, he's definitely like the self-sacrificing type.
Mhm.
So I think that goes into once he becomes Venom, he's like, oh, I'm a monster. You can't trust me. I'm a monster. You got to leave me alone. I have to go off and go on an island by myself so I don't hurt anyone. Because I don't think Xaden trusts himself is like the big part. And that's what I think we see a lot through this book with like the scene with like a little tiny speck on the headboard and a few other scenes throughout the book. I still trust him 100%. I just think he has himself some like self-sacrificing tendencies that we've just seen play out the
Right.
entire book.
I agree, and I also thought it was really funny every time Violet would call him a brute when he went away to like pretty much sulk. And I guess it's not sulking because it's pretty crazy that he is learning venom and he doesn't really know like how it's going to affect him. We know it's going to take his soul, but like how, and we don't know what part of his soul it's going to take first. So I did laugh every time that she was calling him a brute.
Yeah, and I feel that it'd be different if he turned venom like just for funsies and he just wanted to channel from the ground. But from the beginning, like the reason he did it was to save Violet. So his intentions to me are so clear still. I think I'm a little bit Delulu and will just always trust him just for 100%. We were updating as we read how much we trusted him, and we had 1%, and it was going down as we read, but we all started at 100 because we love Xaden so much. I think I have definitely a toxic level of trust in him overall.
So now that we've kind of set the scene here, I think we should take a little bubble break, make our next drink, and then we'll get into the plot a little bit more.
Sweet, more drinks. Let's go.
All right, so for my drink, I went with the green poison that seems to belong to the venom to make this very green drink. We did vodka, orange juice, and some Midori. It's really good. I hope you guys like it. Cheers.
Cheers.
Now, one of the themes in the Empyrean series is a balance in magic. It's something we've seen since the first book. So with all the new things we learn in Onyx Storm, what are your guys' thoughts on the new information about nature's balance?
I feel like the most information we got about this came from Theophany when she explains about being able to kind of tip the scales a little bit every century or so. Right now, to me, it seems like things are skewed towards the Venom's favor. I mean, they're Venom, so they're channeling, and then now we see they've got runes. We see they've got signets now, which we were not expecting. That was crazy. So I feel like things right now are tipped towards the Venom, but
I totally agree with you. I think the Venom definitely have the scales of balance tipped more in their favor because we're seeing the dragons be so picky and choosy with their riders to try and get a second signet out of their riders. I don't think we'd see that if there's not something that the Venom didn't have going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. I think they have to have more than just Wyvern. And I think we kind of got like a little taste of that at the very end when Theophany was on this massive Wyvern that's even bigger than Coda. That just tells me like alarm bells were ringing when I heard that, or when I read that. When I heard that, because I was there. I was like, they have to have more going on that we just don't know about yet. And you're right. They do have signets now and they do have runes now, but I feel like there's still got to be more in their court.
So the Venin and Irids both disappeared in tandem 600 years ago. So right now we see a bunch of Venin, and I feel like their balance is the Irids. So I think the key to restoring that balance and hopefully defeating the Venin is going to be the Irids coming back and actually helping in that.
That's such an interesting thought. I never thought of the Irids being the Venin's balance, but I like that.
Yeah, and that would kind of explain why Theophany wanted Indarna so bad, because she knows how powerful she is and how she could actually like help defeat the Venin.
Yeah.
I know this is kind of a theory that we chatted about a little bit, and I've seen online with Theophany talking about mom and them being a balance, like that each rider is the balance for a Venin. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg, which one came first? Like,
yeah.
did the Venin come first, and then the dragons bonded with the riders to give them the signets
Yeah.
that would match the Venin and could, like, you know, fairly fight them? Or were dragons always bonding to riders, and then the Venin came up after that? Because, like, how Theophany said it, it was that Lilith was the match for her.
Right. So she was there first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was like, who knows if that's true or not? Is that just ego talking? Is that...
Right. Because
like,
that's
what
not
is
the
that?
way that the fables are written,
Yes.
to your point.
But
Yeah.
Victor's right history.
Oh, shoot.
And you already know with Basgiath, none of their history can be trusted. None of their teachings can be trusted.
Yeah, I guess we don't know where the Book of Fables came from because nowhere else like has it, right?
I had some thoughts on this. We're talking about the Fables of the Baron, right?
Yes, the
Yeah,
Fables
well,
of the Baron.
I mean, I think it came from the Baron, and that's where they said that the Venin first basically took over. I think this is Venin lore, and it also demonizes dragons in this book, which brings me back to kind of like what Bethany was talking about just now, where she was saying that the Irids could be the balance to the Venin. The Irids also say when they're talking to Violet and Andarna that Andarna became the very thing that they ran from. They ran from the dragons, I think.
Oh.
The dragons have been called demons this whole time. We know that something's going on. There's a split in the Empyrean. I think we've got good dragons and bad dragons going on. We also know, like, when she's having that initial encounter with Theophany, she says, or asks, I should say, who did you bond first? The dragon who gifted you the power of the sky, or the Irid? So we know that they're after Violet's command of the sky. They're very interested in that. Tarn, I think, tipped the scales when he gifted that signet to Violet. They say that it says more about the rider than the dragon, but when they're talking to the Irids, they talk about, what did you gift your rider? What did you gift your rider? And we know the dragons are keeping secrets and that they've been bonding a certain way. So maybe when he says, like, I know exactly who and what you are, like all that she was capable of handling this signet, or maybe that she would be able to give that signet. I don't know if they can read what kind of signet they're going to be able to gift their rider. I don't know, but I think that Tarn bonding Violet, I think, was supposed to balance the scales.
Any other thoughts on nature's balance?
I have one thing that kind of goes along with what Paige was saying. Do you think that with that split in the Empyrean, maybe there's some dragons that disagree maybe with bonding? Because each year they keep saying less and less dragons become willing to bond.
Ooh, I think that goes into the whole rebellion, because we do see some dragons are intentionally picking Mark ones to try and get that second signet. And I'm wondering if that's a split in what happened with the rebellion and how some dragons feel like that went down versus how some others. So I think that like maybe started like a civil war within the dragons. But then there could have been more things happening in the background on top of that with some riders turning Venin that we learned about. So I just think there's a lot of playing parts here.
I also wonder who Violet's balance is, because towards the beginning of the book, I thought it was going to be Theophany, but obviously it was revealed that Lilith was Theophany's balance. So I have a theory that the hymn that Theophany is always talking about, which is always super vague, might be Violet's balance. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts of who could be.
Oh,
her
yes, I
balance or
do.
balance.
I do, actually. So I think that this person, we know that they live a long time. The Venin are just channeling energy. Theophany's been around for, I think, at least a couple hundred years, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And whoever she's reporting to, I want to think is older. we've heard about this mysterious General Daramore a few times in the Great War and like what happened. I feel like he must be their big bad. And I think it's been the same war constantly, and it's just different people fighting it. But I think that the General Daramore is going to come back. I don't think they would hint at him just to like not bring him up again. And if we know they can live a long time, I think it's got to be him.
From the first 6.
Yeah, I think that there's a theory out there too that he was the one that maybe tried to bond to an Irid, and then the Irid wouldn't bond, so he turned.
Oh.
I don't know if that's going to be, true. I don't remember where I read it, but that was something that I thought was pretty interesting. He could be the original brother.
From the Fables.
Yes. I don't know where I read the one about the Irid refusing to bond, but I think General Daramore could be the first brother that channeled, and he's just living on forever. I mean, if you're the OG Venom, I would think that's who Theophany would want to get in cahoots with.
Yeah, she seemed like she's playing a political game there a little bit.
Sounds horrible, but what if the balance is Xaden?
Oh. Because Xaden's now Venom, you're saying, if they're each other's balance.
I don't know if it's going to be Xaden, though, because we also have Lynx who just developed shadows.
Yeah, that did seem like that was a huge
I
plot
do worry
point.
that he could end up mentoring. I don't know. I think there could be something said for like the mentoring moment that Xaden and Lynx had as well. He seemed like he was just like, okay, calm down. This is what you're going to do. And he handled it so beautifully. I want to see more of that between Xaden and Lynx, but now they're on two different sides of the coin. So we're going to have one exceptional shadow wielder on the Venom side, and then we've got poor Lynx that doesn't know how to use it. Or will Xaden also maybe train him how to fight him? I don't know, but I really liked seeing that mentorship. Or would Lynx maybe turn to try to get more instruction from Xaden? Do you guys have any other ideas about who could be the balance for specific Venom?
Like any rider or Venom
Yeah,
in particular?
like for me, I was thinking about Sloane.
Oh.
Obviously, she's a siphon, and there's one other siphon that we know of, and that's Naelin, and we're pretty sure that he's Venom. And I almost wanted to think that maybe Naelin could have been the one that Theophany was referring to at first. I just don't think he's old enough for it to make sense for him to be the big bad, but he was Terrence bonded, and I think that there's something to be said for that, like he wants you. And we also know that like the Venom have runes now. Brennan had the rune on his hand when he was resurrected. We all think Naelin's responsible for doing that. And I think that we're going to find he's the one that brought the runes to the Venom, and that's why they have Wyvern now.
Oh, he's like
I think
on
that he
the
could
bad
be,
side.
yeah, I think that he could be like big bad. I mean,
interesting.
yeah, I'm not excited about it. And I think that there's been allusions to, like Rebecca said something about a sibling betrayal. So I think that it's probably Brennan, and it's probably going to be something to do with his relationship with Naelin. I think it's just kind of one of those background thoughts that I don't like thinking about. But I mean, Brennan died for sure and was resurrected. And we know that the way that runes work, like they work for a certain amount of time. They have to be tempered. There's a purpose. Something's going to happen there when the time is quote unquote right.
Oh, you think he's like a ticking time bomb with
I mean, yes, he's made.
Yeah, I will say out of the siblings that Violet has, he's probably the most sus. Maybe because he faked his death for so long. Like, that's a weird thing to do to your siblings. Mira seems to be trustworthy throughout this story.
And the dad said only to trust Mira.
Oh, you're so right. You're so right. That's the red herring right there. Or like,
That's crazy.
yeah.
And also, too, Taryn always says we do not speak of the one who came before.
Oh, yeah.
It gets shut down quick.
That's what makes me think that he has to for sure be Venom, is that Taryn's like, absolutely not. We're not talking about my toxic ex. Like, no.
Yeah. And it could also be part of why he chose Violet again, if that was supposed to be her gift that could tip the scales. And if he was like, nope, I'm in this now. He's bonded to Sigil. Sigil's clearly like spearheading this mission for whatever the divide is in the Empyrean. I think Taryn and Sigil are leading, and everybody else is following them. And then you have the bad dragons. I don't think all the dragons are bad, for sure. But I don't trust the Empyrean for 1 second anymore.
Yeah, we're never let in on the Empyrean either, so it's very hard to know what their politics are when we just hear third hand of what they're saying and what they're doing. So I could see them being untrustworthy.
So around this time, we also meet our new big bad Theophany, and I think she's pretty badass. What are your guys' Theophany theories?
So yes, I do want to talk about Theophany. I have so many theories here, so I'm going to kind of be a little all over the place, but I swear the full picture will make sense. So let me take you guys back to the beginning of the book, the whiteout conditions, right? This, in my opinion, has to be Theophany's first entrance because we know that Lilith was her balance. So now Theophany's left unchecked. So she's like, I'm going to do these whiteout conditions. I'm going to make it super difficult on all of these rounds that they're doing to check the venin. I'm going to make it super easy for my venin. I'm going to let them sneak right into the college under these whiteout conditions. So I think that's our first introduction. And then I also think it's interesting that Theophany wants to mentor Violet. So here's why I think Theophany's low-key obsessed with Violet, aside from Andarna being an Irid. We know that Violet's mom got really sick when she was pregnant with Violet. We've hypothesized that this might have been an attack or a poisoning by a venin. I think whoever was behind this attack or poisoning was Theophany. She tells us that Lilith was magic's balance to her, so we know she's a little main character energy. And I think that she's had a
Rivalry.
thank you, for a long time with Lilith. So while Mama Sorrengail is pregnant with Violet, she tries to poison her or Violet. We know that Violet is born weaker than her siblings, and Papa Sorrengail, with all of his expertise with the Isle Kingdoms, might have known that Theophany can never return to Dune's temple. I think that's why he took her to get dedicated. He wanted to keep Violet safe. We know that the priestesses didn't finish her dedication because she still has choices to make. I think this takes us to where we are now. Violet has choices. She's an adult. She's been taught by her dad to question authority and taught by her mother to be strong. She has the mind of the scribe, but a heart of a rider, so she knows not to be tempted by Theophany or her power. Even though Theophany promised to teach her and let her keep her dragons, which for I think anybody else would sound amazing, and they'd take it. But because she's been trained to do what's right, she's been trained to maintain the balance. That's my theory on Theophany Violet.
I'm going to piggyback off this a little bit because I think that this goes into my further evidence for Violet's totally venin. And this is why. I think that you're definitely right about the fight between Theophany and General Sorrengail in the past. I do think it was the poison that came into play. And I'll tell you why at the end for what I think was further evidence that it turns you venin. I don't think it was an accident in Fourth Wing that they talk about her bloodshot eyes and that Violet totally thought she was venin and this and that. Maybe Mama accidentally channeled at some point. We know that Xaden accidentally channeled. Who knows what happened or who she was trying to protect that day. But she had just come off the front lines and she came home and had her bloodshot eyes. She had this terrible fever when she was pregnant and this and that. And we know that Violet got horribly sick when she was infected with this poison previously in Fourth Wing.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to believe that the poison turns you venin whether you want to or not. And I think it's just a part of Violet. She might not have turned venin, but we already heard that the Irids kind of alluded to like, oh yeah, if the venin were to evolve or the next generation of venin. I think Violet was born venin, and I don't think that venin would traditionally have babies because in theory, you're having babies because you are going to care about something and love something. And I don't think the venin are capable of doing that. They have no soul. So Violet was able to be born through like a loving relationship and be venin. I think that it's a part of her and she just is choosing not to turn. And that's so cool. The reason that I think that the green poison is something that turns you venin, I mean, hot take, guys. I don't think Quinn's dead.
What?
Quinn's not dead.
Wait,
Quinn was stabbed with a green poison dagger. And while Imogen is just totally crying over Quinn's body and everything, she's like, oh, she's taking the color of the stones with her. And as soon as Garrick picks her up, oh, same thing's happening. And I don't think Quinn's dead. I think she's venin now. And I think the green poison turned her. And I think it's just further evidence that that's a tool that they're using to recruit. And they're probably also ending up with more venom with signets because they're picking them up in these battles.
Oh. I don't want Quinn to be Venom.
I think she's dead. I think she's dead. They stabbed her in the heart. She had no pulse. I think she's dead. I'd rather her be dead than turn venom. I cried so hard when she died. I don't want to believe that she can turn venom after all the tears I shed for that death.
I totally love those theories though, so much. Because Theophany was obsessed with Violet, wanted to see her everywhere, tracked her movements. I don't know. This is me just thinking. This is something I thought of 2 seconds ago. Do you think that Theophany almost feels as much as she could, a motherly thing for Violet?
I do.
Oh, I'm the match to your mother.
I do think it was a little oh, I created you, but maybe
In a weird way.
yeah, I'm gonna scoop you up.
Well, I also think Theophany's a scientist.
A scientist. What do you mean by
Yes.
that?
I think that she loves the history of it and loves the way that venom are created and the way the power works, because she always was very interested in almost teasing Violet with all this information. I think likes to experiment a little bit. She likes to set up these games. She likes to see how Violet's going to react and how Violet's going to play out against her. Maybe more of a
Oh.
strategist than a scientist, but
Gotcha. That's interesting.
Mhm.
All right, Bethany, you listen. What do you think?
So I was so fascinated by the fact that Theophany said, quote, "Your mother knew at your age that she was no match for me." Because to me, that shows that Violet's mom, Lilith, she knew about the venom 30 plus years ago.
Yeah.
All of Violet's and her siblings' lives, she knew about them. And I feel like that could kind of explain why Lilith has been portrayed as being kind of cold. She's been constantly scared and looking over her shoulder to protect her family because she knows the venom are out there, and specifically Theophany, who's so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's why Papa Sorengale was I have to protect her. She's going to this island and she's going to be a priestess because I'm so terrified of what she's capable of. And I totally think mom and dad were talking about her constantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Theophany definitely has, we see kind of an obsession with Violet.
Mhm.
And I saw a fun theory that Theophany was the reason that there was such a big storm at the parapet in Fourth Wing, which I thought was fun. She could have been the
Oh.
cause of that in the first place.
Oh, she was trying to kill her off before she even
Right.
had a chance.
Well, yeah, because
Yes.
everybody always assumed it was her mom.
Yes.
That would be crazy.
That would be, I did think it was the mom. I was like, that bitch. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, everybody was she's going to do that to her own daughter.
Yeah, I guess, dude, that just put a final puzzle piece in my brain that solidified. Yes, I totally agree.
100%.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have to ask you guys because personally, I saw that she was a weather wielder coming. I did not think she was a lightning wielder. What are you guys' thoughts?
I thought she had 2 signets actually, because when she was talking about the tornado, I was like, oh crap, here comes mom basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get Theophany, so I was like, oh okay, that's her thing. And then I was like, oh, she wields lightning too. And it took me back to, I've been really hooked on trying to figure out what's going on with this poison. And I thought that maybe the fact that the venom were getting signets had to do with whoever they had stabbed.
Oh, they were
I thought they
stealing.
were absorbing their signets or their magic or something. So
Oh.
I was like, well, we know mom got stabbed. We know Violet got stabbed. She's just collecting signets now. So I just took that as fact, from the beginning, that she had 2 different signets, but I didn't realize the lightning was just happening because her storms were so controlled.
So when I found out that they had a signet, I thought since they could mimic the fighting style, that they were also mimicking the signet of who they were fighting. So I thought that they could
Oh.
potentially have more than one signet, and it's not necessarily their signet. It's just whoever they're fighting, since they can copy their fighting style. They were also, it's some way absorbing the signet, but also just while they were fighting them. I didn't think they would keep it if they were going to fight somebody else.
Gotcha. That's interesting.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I always thought the venom could just copy. I didn't really think they had powers of their own. They just were powerful, and they just were really good at copying or at matching, kind of.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting red herring. I don't know why, but when I saw Theophany coming, when they were kind of setting the scene with what was happening with the storm, I was like, the mom turned venom. Oh my gosh, she's still alive and she's out there. And then Theophany showed up. So I was like, oh, she's a weather wielder like her mother.
I'm like the worst at picking up on things unless it explicitly like tells me. For example, this is like throwing it back. No idea Jasenia was deaf. I thought like there was a scribe sign language like that's how they just communicated. So unless something's like vividly explicitly said, I have a hard time picking up on it. So when they were in the first fight or battle and there was a tornado, I just thought there was a wind wielder there. I believe it was Garrick. So I was just like, oh, someone wielded a tornado out of their wind. And I was like, I guess it kind of makes sense because wind and tornado. So I never actually put together that she was the storm wielder until she explicitly pretty much told us.
Interesting.
No, I'm so with you on that. I feel like the first time I read a book, I'm just like in it for the vibes. So I just am like not picking up on things. It takes my reread for me to actually like dive in and understand the lore and like start to think of theories. So completely agree. Now, one of the things we mentioned in our Gearing Up episode was that Violet knew exactly where her dad's research was hidden, and then she never mentioned it again. We were honestly really disappointed when it didn't show up in the possessions left for Mira like we thought it would, but we were so pumped when she partnered with Dane to get her dad's research. With that, we got a lot more Papa Sorrengail lore. So what was everyone's favorite piece of new information we got from him?
I loved hearing more about Asher and his background. So like, wasn't his name Asher Daxton? Yep. And just like seeing who he was maybe before Lilith, before he had children, his research. I'm a little curious. I don't know, you guys probably are too. What did he get up to on the Isle Kingdoms? Because we know he went there before Violet was born because he knew about them. I don't remember what her name was, but that older lady at the bookstore knew who he was, knew his plan. One thing I lived for in this book was all the little excerpts at the beginning of the books. Loved reading those. Those are my favorite parts. And one was, sometimes I worry about Violet. She has your sharp wit, quick mind, and steadfast heart paired with my bullhead tenacity. When she finally and truly gives that heart, I feel it will overrule all other gifts that you've given her, and logic will cede its voice to love. And if her first two liaisons are any indication of what we might expect, God's help her, my love. I'm afraid our daughter has atrocious taste of men. I sat here cackling for like an hour after reading that part, which was definitely something recovered probably from Lilith to her husband. So
Yeah.
we definitely know that Violet had some background with her dad, probably talked to her dad about boys, or at least her dad knew of her previous partners and apparently hated all of them but Dane, which I found absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, my favorite information we got from him was definitely the Daxton lore we learned. Now, I kind of went a little bit deep into my theories on this because in one of the Isle Kingdoms, Vi was asked if she's Asher Daxton's daughter, and she didn't have any sort of reaction to this, which to me means that she knew him by that name, and therefore I think that that was his name before he married Lilith. So I kind of have questions of why he took Lilith's name in the first place. Like, why did he give up his name? Was it that he didn't want to be connected to his mother anymore? Because we did find out that they kind of cut off contact with her at some point as well.
I think I know the answer to this because I think that was answered in one of the books. You took the higher power bloodline's last name, and it didn't matter if it was like the paternal or maternal.
Okay.
So Lilith was a general, I think, at that point, and Asher was just a scribe because she was more of a person in power. That's the last name that needed to be passed on was Sorrengail, not
Interesting.
Daxton.
Now, speaking of his level, though, he only got to lieutenant colonel. And one of the like excerpts is written by Colonel Daxton, which is higher than he ever ranked before he died. And so that to me means that that was written by most likely his mom, the grandma that we get little sneak peeks into. And so I'm so curious, like, if she's going to play a bigger role. Like, she was a very high ranking individual.
Oh, I didn't even pick up on that, Bethany. What a great... Did you catch that?
I was going to say that I totally thought it was him the whole time. And I thought it was just funny, like, 'cause it's Colonel Daxton's Guide to Surviving the Scribe Quadrant. So I thought she was reading her dad's book about, like, how to become a scribe. But yeah. Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I
I think she's going to have so much information because we saw Mira go visit her and she's kind of secretive about what she learned. But I feel like she's going to hold like a big role in the fourth book about how to either at least control Venenism, like to help control Xaden. I don't know. I'm just so intrigued by that use of Colonel Daxton. I feel like she did that on purpose to try to give us a
so
little...
glad you pointed this out too, because this whole time, something else that's just been like bugging me when we talk about the Fables of the Baron and where that book came from. Could this be something that was given to him by grandma then? Was she reading him these stories? Like, that makes it so much more interesting to me. I always thought it was his, and I was like, why is he growing up with Venin lore?
Yeah. And I also wonder why he shut off communications with her, because when he tells Violet, trust no one except Mira, that includes
His mom.
his mom.
Yeah.
So what did she do that made him not only cut off communication, but pretty much directly tell Violet, don't trust her?
Interesting.
I'm really curious about what Asher knew as well, because in chapter 17, the recovered correspondence of Asher to Violet, he said, my brightest light, I meant to prepare you, but only had half the time for the lessons you need, half the history, half the truth, and now time runs short. I failed Brennan the day I watched him walk the parapet. I failed Mira when I could not stop her from following, but I fear my death will fail you. Your mother and I trust no one, and neither can you. What did he know? What was he caught up in? What were him and Lilith caught up in? And why were they failed by going into the Riders Quadrant? Because Lilith forced Violet to go into the Riders Quadrant.
I feel like for me, because we know that Lilith did not agree with Violet getting dedicated. And I think for me that just speaks that mom and dad are on the same, like they have the same goal, but they don't always agree on how to get there. Whereas Lilith is very much like they need choice. They need to go through, get a signet, have an option to fight this war and to do what's right. And I think he saw it more as like, there is no hope. I'm going to keep Violet safe in this temple that I know that Theophany can never enter in. And I think that's where we see a little bit behind the curtain when Lilith is saying like, I might never forgive him for doing this, because I just don't think that they're always on the same page. But I do think that they have a common goal of trying to keep their children safe.
I go back to like when you ask about why did he not want them going into the Riders Quadrant, it also really comes down to which dragon they're going to bond. If we're really not trusting the Empyrean right now, we know that that's basically sending them off to potentially bond to something that he's maybe perceiving as evil. Like, you got to remember, he's reading her Fables of the Baron, and in Fables of the Baron, they allude to the dragons basically being demons.
That's interesting.
Okay, so speaking of Asher Sorrengail, I have to ask, how did everyone feel about him setting up Violet and Dane?
I absolutely love all of like Asher's lore when they went to get the books. I thought it was great. I was eating it up. I loved also like the questions that Violet had to answer, and I just loved how Xaden and Dane were both there. And like, I thought the tensions were so high, but I thought it was such a good part of the book. I was so intrigued the whole entire time I was reading it.
I was cracking up at Mira's reaction, I think, the most, where she was just like, OMG, this is so funny. Like, I loved getting, I think, a little bit more of that family touch between Violet and Mira in that moment, because they've been, I don't know, kind of rocky a little bit throughout this book. And it just felt like it became a very wholesome moment for everybody that we needed. And I think Dane was probably also just like, can you imagine how mortified Dane is in that moment when you've got Xaden like looking at you like, oh, you were gonna marry her? I don't think so. And Dad's basically like planning their wedding, and he's like, you know what? Let me just spend all this time teaching Dane everything he needs to know to guide Violet on this journey and help her out, because he's just decided that they're gonna be together after seeing what they report as her horrible taste in men. And he's like, nah, she'll choose the nice guy for sure. That's definitely not what happened. And it made me think a little bit more of what is kind of the path that he was putting her on. And she was like, she had eyes for Dane for sure back in, you know, Fourth Wing. And I thought it was kind of interesting too, like, you're going through the books and everything that he had left for her and the lore that she chose to share with us. I really do wish we got more of what she was reading, because we only got the bits and pieces that came up in this book, like the poison berries with the birds and their beaks and all of that. I just found it so interesting that he seemed to know everything that she was possibly going to run into here. So did he try to do this himself before? And he's just trying to give her everything he learned along the way?
Honestly, I thought he was a little nuts, like, when I was reading it, because I was like, he just basically planned this massive treasure hunt, right? It's like, what is he doing that he can't, to your point, just do it himself? That he's leaving breadcrumbs.
Well, he was also in private discussions, though, with the Empyrean. And I think it's so important to go back to that, because, like, we know for a fact that Andarna overheard conversation that he was having with the Empyrean. So how is a scribe talking to the dragons? I still think this is a huge plot point that I'm just so excited to learn about. But he also, in theory, doesn't necessarily trust the dragons implicitly. I don't know. There's just something to be said for whatever is going on with the dragons and his role within the Empyrean, because I feel like he was acting as their agent in some kind of way.
I'm curious if we're going to get more on it, though, because what are these books that he left for Violet leading up to? Like,
Yeah.
was it for everything, like, with the Sage, or is he going to have more information on actual Venin? I almost thought that, I don't know, is Asher's storyline kind of going to fall out because now she defeated the Sage and she got the books, and, like, is the treasure hunt over, or is she always going to be on the hunt for more information from her dad? It's hard to grasp how much information, like, he actually knew. He was involved in, like, so many little pieces, and it is really interesting to think about how he did leave this treasure hunt, and it's like, how long was he actually away from Basgiath and his wife and kids for? We don't truly know everything he was doing, which is so interesting, but I was like, is that storyline over now?
I like to think that we're going to come back to it because I think that we're going to get more information once Violet, Mira, and Brennan get over themselves and start talking to each other, because Mira's got half the puzzle.
Yeah.
Violet has the other half.
So my thoughts on the whole Asher setting Dane up with Violet thing go super deep. And there's two theories I have in this podcast that I need some like tinfoil hats on. Like you got to buy into it a little bit. They're kind of far out there. But I think that Violet is some sort of prophecy that Asher like discovered in all of his research. And a few things that kind of led me to believe this. Right away, Taryn called her the Silver One, which I don't think is like as lighthearted as we are thinking. Her first encounter with Venin ever, they didn't want to just kill her. They said, quote, they want to split her open to see where her power is coming from. And that's something that like they've never had interest in doing with anybody else. So that's very specific about Violet. Also, Taryn, we know, have said, I know exactly what you are, Violet Sorrengail. Theophany has this obsession with her. Like, I feel like there's so much more lore that we don't know about Violet. And so I have this theory that Asher discovered this and he knew that she was going to be this prophecy and that he told Dane about this. And that's why Dane was so protective of her during like that first book mainly, where he was constantly pushing her away from being a writer. He wanted her to go into the scribe quadrant. He was pushing her to choose Indarna instead of Taryn after threshing. He said at one point, I'm not saying you didn't just kick absolute ass by getting there, Vi, but you have to leave. You'll break the first time they put you in the sparring ring. And that's before the dragon sense that you're. And Violet cuts in and says, less than the others. But I think if he actually finished that sentence, it was going to be something about being the Silver One or something that would allude to this prophecy that he knew about. So I feel like Asher didn't only want Dane to be with Violet just because they're close growing up and he liked him, but because he knew that Dane had her best interests at heart and knew all of this information too.
Interesting.
So very far out there theory, but just something I thought about.
No, I love that.
So in this book, we're left all these hints by Dad to only trust Mira. But as the story progresses, we see the sisters kind of struggle to talk to each other. What were you guys thinking watching that unfold?
I know that I was personally really annoyed with the not talking. It also felt like the same thing where it was just like back in, Fourth Wing when they ask about her dad's research and she's like, oh, I know exactly where it is. And then we never bring it up again. And it's like, only trust Mira. Let's never talk about that. It just feels like she's ignoring the things right in front of her sometimes. And it's very frustrating. And I know that she's got a lot of things going on and she's very wrapped up in whatever she's got going on with Xaden. And that's clearly very important. She needs to foster that relationship. But she seems to be forgetting all these clues that were laid out for her. And every single time that she does pay attention to what her parents were doing, we get further into the lore. We start finding, missing pieces to everything. But it felt very reminiscent of when Violet and Xaden were not talking to each other. And then it's like they finally start talking and you're like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. So I'm looking forward to the part where they do actually talk. I gotta believe that it's coming. But it felt very much like Violet and Xaden's dynamic transferred to Violet and Mira.
Oh, yeah, I can totally see that. To further your point, Violet was clearly trained by her father, and Mira was clearly trained by her mother. So they probably were working towards the same goal, but like divided the pieces so that one person didn't have all of the answers, right? You had to rely on that sibling relationship to succeed. It is frustrating to see them like not do that.
Going back to like with Paige, with just them not talking and the frustration there, I also felt that throughout the book. And I think a little bit of it was Mira strongly disagrees with Violet and Xaden's relationship, especially after Mira found out that Xaden was Venin. They fought a lot.
I think they just have a sisterly bond. I don't think it was like a lack of them talking. I think that they are bonded in a different way, and it's almost like it's more than like a family connection. I think like a good example was when Violet was like in bed rotting for like 3 or 4 days straight, and Mira just crawled in, and not like, oh, Violet was better, but Violet finally spoke after like 3 or 4 days. Like I think they have truly like a different kind of bond that it's harder for somebody on the outside to see. I think maybe there's not the trust we're looking for, but I don't think they always need to speak what they are thinking, especially with like Mira being trained as a writer and Violet being trained as a scribe. I think sometimes they don't always need to express what they feel, but I do think maybe where the dad's concerned, they need to actually talk about things like that. But I don't think it's like a lack of communication. It's almost like a lack of what is there to talk about, and like how do they actually explore like what is missing, and when is like the right time going to be for Mira to tell Violet everything she's been talking about with the grandmother.
Yeah. No, I totally agree there. Kind of goes back to how Violet is very driven by her heart. I think Mira is more driven by her mind.
Oh.
So Violet's like a lot more like emotionally reacting to stuff, specifically things with Xaden. And Mira's like, girl, why aren't you being logical about this? Where does that scribe mind come in?
Yeah.
Because we know that Violet, when it comes to Xaden, logic kind of goes out the window. I think she is missing all those hints, like you said.
I think they also struggle with just like honesty and being transparent about things. And I think that's caused kind of an issue and a strain in their relationship, specifically like Violet not telling her right away that Brennan is alive and Xaden is Venin. Like those are things that are such key important information that isn't shared. And then even as far as Mira going and visiting their grandma and then being so secretive about it for so long before finally leaving little bits of information about it. But it's just those things that I think their bond will hopefully grow, especially in the next book. And there was a chapter heading where Lilith says, "We can only hope the bond between our daughters is strong enough to endure the paths they've chosen. They'll need each other to survive." So I feel like hopefully in book 4, we'll see that bond develop a little bit more because it seems like they're going to be so crucial for each other.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do want to talk about Grandma's bracelet for just a second.
Yeah.
I was curious like what the significance is on this. So it is tourmaline is what it's called.
Tourmaline.
So it's tourmaline. And I was like, oh, it's your bracelet. Okay. It looks like Tony's bracelet. So I was like, what the heck is that? There has to be a significance here. We can't just like have a bracelet just to have a bracelet. It's got to have some purpose. So I looked at the very astute internet and I Googled. It says that tourmaline is known for protection against negative energy or negative intent. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I was wondering if this could offer some protection similar to the runes, or if maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the story.
I wonder if it could protect you like from the venin somehow.
That's what I was curious about. I was like,
Yeah.
why does this specifically say protect against negative energy or negative intent? That's so weird.
Yes. And I think that it, like, just going back to Grandma too and what all she knows or what all she's learned, it did make me wonder if Mira knew about theophany from her mother's journals. And if she was holding on to pieces of the puzzle. Because, I mean, she was staring at Violet. She didn't bring up anything about thinking that Violet could turn. Like, she was suspicious of Violet being Venin this entire book and said nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's wearing this. Was it to protect her from Violet? Did she think that that was why she needed the bracelet? And maybe why, you know, Mira and Brennan only stayed with Grandma that summer and they knew that, you know, Violet was off doing something. I don't know what Grandma's opinions are on Violet.
I mean, me either. She was like, take this for protection before you go see your sister.
Is Grandma going to be like the wise woman kind of like trope, but she just knows what's going on. She knows what, I don't know, is going to be the answer to all these problems.
I mean, seemingly she's been writing all these books, so like she's got to know something about some stuff.
I hope she plays a big role in the 4th book.
Yeah.
I want more Grandma lore.
I feel like she's either going to just be so knowledgeable or maybe she's even like an oracle who can like kind of see the dark path that could be in the future. And that's My theory is that that is why Asher went and dedicated Violet in the first place, is because his mom saw something in the future, or at least knew something that was going to happen. And that's what put such a strain in the relationship, because Lilith was so upset about him following something that his mom had him do. And then that's what kind of caused the rift in their relationship. If she can see kind of the path that Violet is going to have, and she sees this dark path potentially of her turning Venom, and that's why she had him dedicate her to Dune. What if she was actually just seeing like her heart turning Venom, and her heart belongs to Xaden? And so this whole time she was just foreseeing Xaden turning, and that's what caused them to dedicate Violet. But really, it was never going to be Violet turning in the first place.
Interesting.
I love that thought.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of hard too, because he thought she was going to end up with Dane. So I almost kind of do agree with Bethany that maybe like if her heart was turning, like it would be because of Xaden.
All right, so I think this brings us to our next bubble break, which is going to lead us into episode 2. We're super excited to start talking about Quest Squad and the Zanal gifts and all sorts of other theories we have. And we also have a really fun, silly, goofy theory to go with our bubble break when we join in with part 2.